My name is Dominique Morgan. I am the executive director of Black and Pink, she, her series of pronouns. And I wanted to have this conversation. One, I'm a kid that grew up in Nebraska, not realizing LGBTQ plus History Month was a thing. I recall really focusing on National Coming Out Day in my era, which we now, know is not I don't even know the right word, but it doesn't create community. It doesn't see everybody for where they are in their journey, and it silos someone's truth, and that's not fair. That's not about community. So I wanted to have this conversation, and we're having a series of conversations this month, talking about our history, how we're attached to our history, the history that we want to make, history that we don't want to repeat. And there are 3 panels that you'll be able to engage with. So we're starting it off. Jasmine Tasaki is our Director of Advocacy. We wish her feeling well. And Jasmine is just a force in general. And you'll see Jasmine again because she's on payroll, so she got to pop up. But Preston, it's rare that I get to engage with Preston. Preston, tell the folks a little bit about all things Preston, and then we're going to get into these questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Dominique and Black and Pink, for inviting me. If y'all see me looking up occasionally, I was just explaining to people that there's construction happening, so please forgive me if you see me doing that, if you notice me doing that. Gotta come anytime Dominique invites me somewhere. So it's not, it's definitely something I'm always gonna make time for. As she said, my name is Preston Mitchum. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Director of Policy with URGE. URGE is Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. I'm also an adjunct professor at law at Georgetown University Law Center, teaching LGBT health law and policy. I write, I speak, I do all things that really centers the lived experiences of Black, brown, queer, and trans folks. And so I'm just really happy to be here and really to explain and sometimes even commiserate with all the things that are happening in our world today. And you're right, I remember years ago, I wrote an article called On National Coming Out Day, Don't Disparage the Closet. Because I saw this really dangerous hyper focus on performative natures of being out and expressing yourself, as opposed to really honoring that some people, mostly Black folks, brown folks, queer and trans folks, who decide to not quote unquote come out as just performative gesture, do so usually for safety, do so for other reasons that are not related to the things that the Queer Inc., for example, would tell us that we need. It's always this focus on coming out and not really what happens when you do. What happens when you do and you lose housing? What happens when you do and you lose incarcerated? What happens when you do and you experience poverty? What happens when you lose your job and get fired from your job, right? And so this conversation is really fitting, right? Because it doesn't focus on just the performative act sometimes of coming out, but really focuses on what our history means and what our ancestors wanted for us. So I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you, Preston. I will never forget the day that I use divest so much now because of in the work I do, but back then I didn't realize I was divesting from this oppressive term. But it was the opening weekend of Moonlight, and here in Omaha, I was hosting 3 showings, so I saw it 3 days in a row. And I remember watching this nuanced, varied story of Black folks, Black love, and all these different ways, and I never heard the term DL once. And I remember getting up and thinking, my goodness, how I've perpetuated harm on my people, how I haven't recognized the privilege that a person has to sit in, oftentimes to live their lives in a very public way, and how I don't have a right and shouldn't punish people not knowing what their journey is. And it hit me again, this transition that started for me in March of this year of what you were describing. I was seeing it in real time. I was struggling with knowing that not only holding space as a woman in this world, but holding space as a Black trans woman, I was watching access and privilege and position shift in real time. And I'm oh, this is This is the why of the thing. And I think that looks at our history of our people, because there's this idea that I think Black queer people have this obligation to be very, very, very public about everything that we do around our identities, about who we love, so on and so forth. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that allows us to really have our own experience around our experience? And where do you think that idea could be valid?
So that's interesting, and I appreciate your self-reflection. I remember a panel that we did, a webinar a couple of months ago, and one of the things that you often described is like, what does it mean to go through a transition and suddenly start to lose like certain accesses and privileges, right? Because now there's like a gender dynamic and a sexism dynamic and relations with like being treated as a Black woman, obviously. And so it's like now there's elements of misogynoir and these like fake like ideas of paternalism or patriarchal violence that obviously, we can all experience as Black people, but it's definitely layered when it comes to the intersections of like gender and race, among other things. And so I just really appreciate that self-reflective moment. I do think there's obviously some value of quote unquote coming out. One thing that I think it was Darnell Moore who years ago I saw the way he wrote about it was actually being invited in. So like you're not really coming out to folks. Some people are actually honoring their existence by allowing you to be invited in to them into their life. And so, I really liked that framing. I will say that, right, we see there's so many examples of young queer boys, young queer people, young trans people who don't know what their adult self can look like. They oftentimes don't see possibility models is probably what people are used to. They oftentimes maybe see it and it could be on TV, which is still a little distant from like those who are actively on the ground and having lived experience of being an adult, who's LGBTQ plus and who's Black and brown. And so I do think there is some semblance, right? There's some positivity around being able to mentor younger people who may be struggling with their sexuality, among other things, right? And again, the balance to that is what happens after the act of coming out. Because you're shedding so many parts of yourself, right? Like, and you don't just come out once. You're coming out every single day. And I think that's the thing that's really dangerous about the notion of like coming out or even inviting people in. It purports that you're only doing it one time in your life. You're doing it when you are going into new organizations. You're doing it when you're going for people who are faith-based, if they're going to new churches or whatever faith-based setting they're going into. You're doing it when you go to different schools. You're doing it when you are actually on the internet every day and you have different people who are following you. There are still people who follow me. I'm like, I didn't know you were gay. And I'm like, really? Because that whole like gay queer thing on my bio. But nonetheless, I realized that for them, I'm coming out in a way again. And so, there's this repeated acts, which also have like really like negative health outcomes and implications for us, especially again at the intersection of being Black and brown, and especially more for those who are like immigrants or incarcerated or people who use drugs, among other things. And so it's a really layered narrative around like the ability to come out or be invited in. Do I think there's some positive aspects? Of course. There can be, there should be, right? We should definitely be models for younger people. But sometimes not at our own experience. I mean, not at our own existence, right? There are many of us who are being killed every day. Though at a national level and an international level, we're not really discussing what it means to be, an LGBTQ person of color and being killed by the police, but we know we're killed by the police. We know that, for those of us who are sex workers, we can still experience violence. We know that there's negative health outcomes. We're more likely to smoke more, to drink more, in addition to other things. And I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with any of those things, right? Like on the face, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But there's a particular reason why like those outcomes happen in the queer and trans communities, right? And a lot of that is through institutional violence and state violence and interpersonal violence. So yeah, I think it's a really layered, it's a great question. And it's a great question that deserves a nuanced and layered answer. not as simple as saying, hey, again, come out, again, I think those are there are good examples of that, but there are also very, very troubling ones, which was also hated, this idea. Dominique, I'm not sure if you remember this, but years ago, there was a campaign around It Gets Better. And I some form of it, but I'm just like, yeah, for who? Like, who does it get better for? Like, let's actually.
And how long does it take? Let's talk about how long it takes.
Exactly.
And let's talk about what you have to have for it to be better.
Yep. I'm like, you got a little coin? You're right. It could be better, right? Like,
my God.
It could be better, right? Like, you maybe live in a more of a metropolitan area. It may be a little bit better than like rural folks, right? Like, it's so, and again, it's so layered, but people talk about it's better, just come out. And it's like, wow, that's really dangerous to suggest that it gets better just because you come out. So yeah.
And I think and I asked that question because I consider you and I to be in spaces where we are doing work that 20 years from now, folks will be talking about us. I think that's fair to say. And I also feel like we're two people who also think about who we come from and who's done the work before us. And I feel as if when I think about my responsibility, my accountability to the movement, I really want to do a good job of showing reverence for what our elders have done, but changing and dismantling behaviors that they had to navigate that we know were harmful to them. So I am not, kind of demonstrating that and modeling that. And so that brings me to like this question about how do you connect to legacy and the power of Black revolutionaries in our history? The first time I found out about Bayard Rustin, I was in Kansas City. I was 33 years old and I was in a training to become a GLSEN facilitator. And I remember being so angry thinking about this man and his hand in this work and how these mainstream spaces had taught me everything outside around him. And wondering as a kid who, didn't feel like school was where it's place for me and all the things I navigated as a youth, if I could have spent time learning about him, how that would have made me connect to being a learner and my hunger to engage. What from our history, from the folks that we definitely benefit from the work that they've began, what do you feel like your connection is to that legacy? And if you had to describe a part of your practice as a leader in the work that you're really trying to reposition the way it looks, why are you doing that? What is the reason for, mine is self-care, mine is trying to show people the good, bad, and the ugly, don't think it's gonna be perfect, because I believed it and it caught me up. So your connection to who we come from, and when it comes to your practice, what have you intentionally tried to shift because you've seen the harm it perpetuated on our elders?
Yeah, oh my gosh, that's such a great question. I know without a doubt that I will be nothing without our elders and without our ancestors. I mean, they braved some battles that many of us would never have to go through. And they try to, set forward this idea of like struggle but also like liberation and love and light. And I think like, when I think of people like James Baldwin and Bayard Rustin and Audre Lorde and Polly Murray and so many other people that, we are nothing without them, right? It doesn't mean that they were perfect. They were not. It doesn't mean that they had it all figured out. They did not. But for me, when it comes to just like legacy and ancestry and spirituality and connection to all those things and all those people, I am nothing without them. I think about them so often because, when I just made this tweet the other day and I just, there's this idea of like, people saying it's on t-shirts and other things and it says, I am not my ancestor. And people think it's like a logical framing, but it actually is pretty anti-ancestor, right? And maybe some people are attempting to run away from their ancestors because they're afraid that we're not gonna be who they were or who we uplift them to be. But it's usually on the tail end of like violence, right? So it's usually like you know, don't let the president get your ass whooped. I am not my ancestor, right? As if they did not, you know, rebel and fight back and push forward, right? Like, you know, many of us can't even stop eating at Chick-fil-A, right? And so I'm just like, you think you about to lead a revolution and you trying to get extra Polynesian sauce? And I'm kind of talking to myself because I still like hate chicken. You know, I'm trying to work out some things too. But my point is that our ancestors went through some and unthinkable things that many of us, again, won't ever have to go through. And so, for me, like, I just sit with this often, and yeah, I mean, there's so much I can say around like what legacy and ancestry means, but I know I do this work deep down inside to live out their wildest dreams, right? To do what they could not do and what they attempted to do. And so absolutely, like, there is something that's so deep and resonant and powerful about our ancestors, and about, you know, about us living through them every single day, because we live through them every single day. We live through their dreams, their expectations, their ideas. And I do want to just say, like, obviously they weren't perfect, right? Like, when I think of like some people, for example, like, you know, there was like this infatuation still with respectability politics. There was, and many times out of survival, for sure. But there was also this like notion of like, the closer to whiteness that I am, the safer I'll be, right? Which is why when you see like, you know, things related to Bayard Rustin, for example, like the people he dated tended to be white men. And then, you know, his life partner was a white man. And again, on its surface, is that a bad thing? Perhaps not. But if there's a consistent pattern to that, and you're queer and you're Black, there needs to be a call in about what that looks like and the reasons why there's a closeness to whiteness and to white people. And so again, not perfect. Our ancestors didn't have to be. We're not perfect, right? We're not expecting purest standard, but we know that people are still like fully living out their dreams and expectations. And I try to do that every single day.
Listen, y'all know how I live for Preston. And I talk often about how I, you know, follow Preston on social media and really leaned into the ways, you know, and absolutely the ways that Preston would challenge me. I would read something and be like, well, goodness, what do I really think about this? Long before we met in person. And so I think it's so valid. For me, I think there's more of an accountability of speaking our truth around what we believe than your truth of seeing like how like who I'm booed up with or whatever. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like that's more important than the other piece of the spectrum, because that is when you can say, I look at this person, I respect this person, and this person's values can affect my values. And there's appreciation there. And what I hear you saying about our elders is that they've helped us really kind of get the root of what we think and what we believe. And then we get to put our own razzle dazzle to it and say, you know what, child, we're gonna leave this to the side, because I'm not really living for that. And I'm going to do this. And not in saying that I'm doing it better, I'm just doing it my way. I'm doing it the way I can do it now. And I think that I've been watching your posts around the whole I'm not my ancestors piece, and it hit me where it was like the audacity, sis, of that. And I think there's, you know,
exactly.
So thank you for always like sometimes just catching us in things that we say that we think are. You are a great litmus test for how anti-Blackness can show up in insidious ways. And I think that's what scares people about you, is that, or what makes them uncomfortable, is that you'll say something and be like, no, I'm not saying that because of that. Oh no, my intention wasn't this. And then you feel a certain way in your chest. And I'm like, okay, this is what white women are saying when this is what Karens do when they cry. So I think that, like, when I look at like some people's reaction, I'm like, Preston just makes you think about like, who are you and how you show up. So I'm appreciative of that.
Thank you so much.
All times.
I appreciate that. I think that's also why, like, when we watch TV shows, it's like a gut punch to many of us. Like, I know people who couldn't watch I May Destroy You, for example, which I thought was such a brilliant show. You know, and I was talking to him about why, and I was like, why can't you watch it? Like, it is hard to watch, to be very fair. But it's also like one of the most thoughtful ways I ever saw sexual assault done, you know, as a survivor. I'm like, you know, we can always be triggered no matter how thoughtful something is done. But in conversations with many people, they were just like, oh, it just seems so extra. And I'm just like, no, trauma is extra.
Right.
And makes you do things that you never thought you would have done. Trauma makes people kill. Trauma makes people steal. Trauma makes people do many things, which is why I'm always like mindful when people talk about crimes. I'm just like, well, what does that mean? What do you mean by crime? What does a criminal mean? Because if a criminal act is occurring because you're experiencing trauma, meanwhile you don't have mental health services because it's so exorbitant, or you don't have access to it generally, then I really want us to talk about what crime looks like and what that means. And to your point, I realized that some people couldn't watch it because it made them think hard about their actions, right? It made them hard about like how many people they've like assaulted going into the club, or how many people asses they grabbed when they were in the club, or how many people they grinded on without their consent, right? Like, it is hard for us to face people and things that actually have us like experience a gut punch, right? And I have many people like that. Listen, our ancestors did that to me. Like, Black trans women have done that for me, right? I'll see things that people will post and I'm like, oh, my heart, like, you just punched me in the most beautiful way. And call me in without tagging me in something, or without, you know, actually calling me out, right? You were just like, my love, listen, I'm gonna say this because I know you wanna do well. Stop it. Don't make it again, right? And year after year after year, I would revisit those conversations in my head because that's how I got better, right? Because an apology is not just naming I'm sorry, right? It's change behavior. So thank you for naming that.
Yeah, it's that good feeling after a good therapy session when you're just like, well, you didn't have to do me like that, but I appreciate you nonetheless. We had an anonymous question. We have two questions. One anonymous from an attendee. How do you explain to people that you can be out with some people, i.e. friends, job, things of that nature, but closeted around others like family? They say, I've noticed it's very common with other cutie pock folks, but I have a hard time explaining this to white LGBTQ plus people because, well, white, they ain't gonna ever get the limitless well of privilege that they drink from. And that's just gonna be like a barrier, I think, on some real shit. I think that's what has become a huge kind of foundation for any friendships I have with white people. Is like, I need you to be able to get your stuff because I don't have the capacity to always explain to you what's the difference between how we're navigating, how we have to navigate the world, how I'm navigating the world different than you. I don't have the time for that, but I think it's important to talk to them about their privilege, but also talk to them about autonomy. Like, I don't even think it's a race piece to it because I know a lot of white folks that don't tell people their business. And it's just that that's the other thing. It was like, there was this conversation of DL and then there was this conversation of discreet. And I was like, okay, DL is insidious and nasty and you in the shadows and you can't ever have a real relationship, so on and so forth. And discreet is classy and, you know, I'm this, I'm that. And I was like, wow, even in the ways that they marginalize us, they add a level of privilege to it in the conversation. You know what I'm saying? It's like the difference between buttercream and whipped topping on a cake. You understand what I'm talking about? And so I think that's the thing, is that even when they're not having to be public, it's not framed as in the closet. It's framed in different ways, and there's always a reason. Your job, the reasons are always valid for the why. And we sometimes, would I even say that we reward them for the ways that they're able to silo part of their life and their story compared to how Black folks, Preston, that incredible letter for Andrew Gilliam and the conversations thereafter, I think we are rewarded for exposing ourselves as much as we can, but I think that we are intentionally punished when we don't show up the way they want us to show up. So with that question, is there any other thoughts that you have around like talking to a white counterpart, a friend, about what that can look like to talk about your lived experience in parts of your life, but also keep it private in others?
100%. So I'll just start by saying that white supremacy usually presents this all or nothing frame, right? So either you are all out, you are all supportive, you are like openly, you're going to pride events, right? You're celebrating in that way. You need to come out on National Coming Out Day, you know, and that's sensitive to me, right? Because I came out on National Coming Out Day, like actual publicly came out, right? But people knew I was gay, and then later, you know, you started using the term queer for years. You know, the first person who I came out to, always joke and say, was the first man I had sex with. Like, that was the first person I ultimately like came out to, right? Or at least like, you know, didn't have, maybe not have the language for it, but that was the first person that I actually came out to. And then after a while, I would, you know, come out, and again, I'm using this all in air quotes, come out all in air quotes. But I would come out then, you know, like to a couple close friends. We would go to the club when I was like a senior in high school, and we would drive like an hour away. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. We would drive an hour away to Cincinnati, Ohio, about 45 minutes an hour away, because we were like, okay, at least nobody gonna be here. Like, oh, hopefully, right? And then later I started coming out more and more to family. But I would say that it was about 4 years before that I at least started accepting that I was gay, with some friends, before I actually told like my sisters or my mother. But also I recognize too that I did that for many reasons, right? Like, you know, when I started like battling things with sexuality, really as I understood it, it was definitely in high school. And, you know, I was in high school, so I was worried about many things, right? There's like proms and there's homecomings. And I went to high school from 2000 to 2004. So it was very different. Like, things were just different, right? We didn't have conversations really around like sexuality in schools or anything. I mean, there was homophobia for sure. You know, there was the use of explicit words for sure, but people were not actually, like, in my opinion, actively understanding sexuality in that way. You know, we were still talking, you know, we still had like text messages on the side and instant AIM. I still remember my AIM screen name from AOL. You know,
AOL needs to do a whole book
exactly
of their part in queer history, because they be
listen,
in chat room.
We had Black Gay Chat. I mean, there were so many, or BGC, as some people may know it, there were so many things that made it secretive. And so, you know, out of survival, we had to keep a portion of that secret. And it wasn't even just secret for secrecy's sake, right? It was literally surviving. Am I gonna get kicked out of my home, right? Like, and I say that as someone who has the most loving mother in the world, but I didn't know how she was gonna react to something different like this, right? Like, I knew she loved me, but how far did that love go? Now I know, but did I know then? Of course not. And so, you know, and again, we battle these things every day, and I want to be careful, because it's not to say that people don't have similar battles now, right? Like, there's so many reports of how that shows up, of youth homelessness happening because, you know, for LGBTQ people especially, right? Because of parent rejection, church rejection, etc. There are many younger people who are still being abused by family members and guardians, you know, from sexual assault, physical violence, emotional, mental violence onward, right? So these moments still show up now, and you definitely see them compounded more for LGBTQ young people of color, especially Black and Brown communities. And as I said earlier, white supremacy gives this all or nothing framing. You know, and I'd be very right. In Black people, we can't live in all or nothing. Like, we just can't. We would die if we lived in all or nothing, right? We're navigating every single day. We navigate how to show up at work, how to show up outside of work, how to show up in the club, how to show up with white people, how to show up with white women, you know, right? I think that's the thing we deal with a lot. And I'm thankful that I don't have to deal with that anymore, right? Because I don't give a damn. Like, it's me, period. Like, right? But it took years to be that person. And I recognize that, like, I was never that person up until maybe 10 years ago, right? Like, you know, even when I was in law school, really, I still wasn't that person. In college, I still really wasn't that person, right? It took a lot of growing and reflecting and evolving for me to be the person I am today. And so, you know, I would say that that's maybe it. You know, I don't know if I have any particular advice of what I would explain to a white person, but I would go back to what it means to survive, right? And if this is a white person who's a co-conspirator or an accomplice, right, not just an ally, but as someone who will really get down and dirty in the fight with you, they will have to recognize that their life just looks different than your life, right? And part of that also means that, you know, how we're viewed by the police, how we're viewed by teachers and administrators, how we're viewed by employers, how we're viewed by healthcare providers, right? All of that matters, and it means that we have to navigate and show up differently. And sometimes that means being discreet, quote unquote, to some communities, and being out and safe and comforted and loved by other communities, right? Again, and I'll end with this, like the notion of family, you know, obviously as we know it, is usually biological. But queer and trans people, and that's true across the board, queer and trans people, but especially for queer and trans people of color and Black queer and trans people, we have to create our families and create our communities, right? That's, you know, we have the house scene, the ball scene, because we have to create those spaces and communities to escape violence, to escape hostility, or at least provide a cover, right? Or at least provide a safety net or resources to have those communities. So, you know, it's really, that's such a great question, and I appreciate it. But just know a lot of it just goes back to survival and really how you choose to navigate and show up.
That survival piece, I've been really trying to explain, like the work we do at Black and Pink, my own journey and how they align often is that, you know, we're in this place where it's survival only, or you might get to a space where people celebrate you for being resilient. And again, I tell folks, resilience to me means that the thing that was trying to kill me, it didn't, and that's what you're celebrating me for. And for that to be the only reason I'm celebrated in my life is exhausting. But when you look at our Black...
say, that's why I hate the concept of resilience.
My God.
We celebrate people because they didn't die. And I'm like, that's not a celebration, right? We should not celebrate people who have to struggle because, like, to be seen as resilient because society keeps fucking us over, right? Like, I don't want to be celebrated to be resilient. I emphatically say, and I know we some cussing people, so I'm sorry I'm a cuss, but like, fuck resilience. Resilience as a concept literally means that you're celebrating folks because they struggle and because they persevere from a struggle, right? We need to tear down the barriers and the walls that make resilience a concept in the first place. We should not be celebrating people for being resilient. Hate it, hate it, hate it. And I know that it's never people's intention, but this is one of those things that goes back to, like, what is the impact versus what are you actually saying? Because I don't want anyone to recognize me as resilient. When people say, Preston, you're so resilient, I'm like, okay, what about the systems that require me to be? Are we focusing on them, or just my ability to, like, suffer through them and be and live?
Listen, I had to write that down. That's what I was doing. As a person who talks about resilience like that, fuck resilience. And also, Preston, it's like, it's not only that's a celebration, we're told that's the only way they're going to celebrate us. That's the only way we're going to get an Oscar. That's the only way that they want to publish our book. That is the only way that they want us to sit on a platform. That has to be a part of our story for us to be in leadership. Like, there's all of it. It has to be a component. And it's scary to me that I'm not allowed to, not only am I not allowed to thrive, you're not telling me that's a potential for me from the start. Because even if as a girl who don't do exercise, beloved, if you start me at the start of the finish line and you say, girl, there's a sickening cheeseburger at the end, I might tip through there with a little more, a little buoyancy. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna get, okay, girl, like, I ain't trying to get there, but the girl said it's some cheeseburgers down yonder.
And that's what I want.
Right? And that's what I'm trying to get to, compared to you seeing all these folks around you trying to get to the finish line. You're like, girl, why everybody moving? Girl, it's just the finish line. No, girl, there's cheeseburgers down there. Yes. Get to them cheeseburgers, sis. And we, when I think about us, and when I talk about us, like, I look at the spectrum of us. The Aaron Langs, the Mariah Moores, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, there's just the Darnell Moores, like, there's just so many Black folks that you can look at and be like, okay, my people are doing their thing. And they're representing what their thing is, and they're sharing a multitude of definitions of what liberation looks like, and they're standing on it. I have the question that was kind of on my list, but look at God, won't he do it? It really leads, it builds off of the question from Chidi that they shared. So I'm gonna ask because also I feel like as Black leaders, oftentimes they position our dreams for ourselves. They always have to be based in I believe my dreams are based in community, but they're not all about community, right? It's like your dreams have to be for everyone else. What happens if my dream is for me? And the beautiful thing is that it benefits others at the same time. So what do you want to be remembered for?
Oh, that's such a, oh gosh. Because I think about this often, and maybe I shouldn't. You know, I will say my therapist always told me to focus on the now, so it doesn't stifle me from being great in the present, or in the future rather. And you know, I received that. But I will say the thing that I want to be remembered, I know I can be a tough pill to swallow for some people, and I'm okay with that, because I know it always comes from a place of love. It doesn't come from a place of, I know this and you don't, right? Because I do believe this is a journey. We all have to get there together. And everybody's not gonna get there. And my goal is not to kill myself to make sure that everybody is getting there. There are some people that have to be cut off along the way. There are some toxic Black folks that have to be cut off along the way. You know, and I think that's just kind of where it is. I think ultimately I want to be remembered for loving Black people so much that it hurts. That I want to be remembered for loving Black, queer, and trans people and non-binary folks. That I want to be remembered for, you know, as someone who truly uplifted the principles of reproductive justice. You know, I know we didn't get into my work, but, you know, every day, you know, when I work in the reproductive health rights and justice space, I see a couple of people who look like me. And when I say look like me, I mean Black, right? Black men are just not really in this work. And maybe that's a good thing, actually. You know, but I will say that, you know, reproductive justice is not happening in a vacuum, right? It's about immigration and state violence and contraceptive equity and abortion care and freedom from police violence and freedom from patriarchal violence. It encompasses so many things that Black people would be better for if people just listened and honored the experiences of Black women. And, you know, and I really want to just be remembered as someone who cared about young people, who cared that young people's voices mattered, and not just during the election, but year round. You know, young people are the present. They're not just the future. Young people are living and breathing and doing the work now. And I just ultimately want to be remembered as someone who just cared and loved deeply for our people. And if that doesn't get me an Oscar or all the awards in the world, I'm fine with that, right? Because the goal is not to do this work for accolades. They nice sometimes, you know, you see them on you see them posted, they're cute sometimes. But, you know, I know deep down inside I would continue to do this work if an accolade was never a thing, because I truly believe in our freedom and our liberation. So that's a lot of things to want to be remembered for, but I think I would boil it down to like righteous indignation and just like loving Black people through and through.
I think, one, you're known for those things now. So you don't have to wait to be remembered for them. You're known for those things. And I think that's important. I think that whole remembrance piece, for me, like, I think people, you know, remembrance is like old death. I think I really had to force myself to get over that fear of what that memory, because, you know, I buried both of my parents before I was 27. And it was a huge catalyst writing their obituaries to think about how long they had lived. And much of the things that described them were either their children or their job or those things. And I knew in my heart they were that much more, but I really couldn't tell you because of how my parents had to live. We didn't have a lot of those conversations, or it wasn't safe for them to, you know, wasn't safe for my daddy to sit down and talk to me about all the trauma and things he experienced and all the joy he had in his heart. He was just having to be a Black man taking care of his family, right? And so I think that memory piece overall is just, I want to be remembered for being me and all the flaws that are in that. And all the, when I got out of prison, there was and Nikki now works with us at Black and Pink. I'm gonna get emotional because this makeup gotta last a couple of more hours. But I was in a class. It was this leadership program that Nikki was leading, co-facilitating. And they asked us to write like our obituary, write our tombstone. It was like that exercise. I know they do that in a lot of kind of leadership initiatives. And I remember being so sad because at that time, the majority of my life had been in prison. And initially, like, I was chasing this idea that I wanted to give you more to say about me than 56892. That was a huge start to me. And now I really love the fact that it's like, one, that's a huge part of me, and I've found the beauty in that. But two, I hopefully continue to show y'all, just because I'm living me. Like, that's like, I just want you to remember me for me. My mom always said, listen, if somebody walk into my funeral saying this, you better tell them, no, I ain't say that. You know, the wrong people show up to the funeral, turn me on my stomach so they can all walk past and kiss my ass. Was her favorite line. Was her favorite line. And so don't let anybody ever tell you who I am when you know when you know it's not who I am. So that's important. And that leads us to this beautiful question from a participant that allows us to kind of pivot to what we want to envision for our community. Looking back and forward, where do you hope to see the Cutie Pot community in 10 years' time? What key ideas and practices are central to making that vision happen? Looking for, and I think that was a beautiful way they started, looking back and forward, because a lot of folks just look forward, and it's like, you can't not look back.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, you got to know where you've been to know where you can go. Thank you for this question, Chidi. That's such a good question. So when I think about what I hope to see from the QT Pop community in 10 years' time, based on where we've been, right? I want to say this, right? We've known some really good moments, right? We hyper-focus a lot on the negative, right? You know, and I think sometimes rightfully so, right? And when I mean negative, I mean like society, like according to societal standards, the acts of violence, among other things, right? Police raids, you know, tick of HIV acquisition in the 80s, you know, and obviously the policing and criminalization of that. We still have, you know, I always tell people this, like we literally have only had sodomy constitutional in our legal system since 2003. Like, we talk about that like it's such a long time. 2003 was literally when sodomy became okay to legally do. Right. And so, and that was only because it was framed as a gay thing, right? It wasn't framed as just like a sexual activity. That one was specifically targeted toward gay men, which actually is another layer, again, a layered thing, because it's like, if it wasn't, it may have still been found to be like a violation, which is like, y'all, it's anal sex. Like, get over yourself. Right?
Shout out to the data team at Pornhub for bringing eye-opening data to the table that allows us to dismantle these false narratives out here. Shout out to the data team at Pornhub.
Exactly. Listen, and for your viewers, you know, have the sex that you want to have, right? We know that that's real, and bodily autonomy and agency are real. So looking back and looking forward, I really want to see, my hope is that we experience a world that is, you know, freedom from criminalization. That sex work, you know, criminalization, that's HIV criminalization, that's criminalization of drug use, and many things, right? And so that's one hope, right? And I think that captures a lot, you know, what does it mean to actually experience a life that is your body and live in your body without criminalization and with freedom and without policing, right? Ultimately, like, one of the things that I really want to make sure that we're experiencing and live in a world is without police. I envision and dream of a world without police often, because, you know, and that's obviously connected to defunding, but actually abolishing the police, right? I really appreciated Miriam Kaba when all the conversations started to circulate again around defunding the police. And people were like, you don't really mean abolish the police, do you? And she wrote an article that says, yes, we literally mean abolish the police.
I said what I said.
Listen, it was in the New York Times, and that was the title of the article. And I was like, I stand for her always. and then really, I really want our hopes and dreams and freedoms to be ours. You know, something that have really, you know, that has really stood out to me, quite frankly, is that a lot of our dreams are really based on white folks' dreams for us and what's possible for us. You know, it's really this like idea of like, don't you really want that? And it's like, no, I want to work for myself with my community and people who look like me without fighting for funding, without having to, you know, like literally give my entire existence to meet a deadline that really is just an internal one. That's not a real deadline. Like these are the things that I think can help us live out our freedom in dreams and hopes. You know, in a perfect world, I would love just like a city for queer and trans people of color. Like a town that is just explicitly for us. We
taking DC back is what you're saying.
Listen, we need to, because you know, DC is like 47% Black now.
Listen, I went on a few tours and the girl said
it's appalling.
That was our city. So listen, we just going back.
It's appalling. Like it is disgusting that in my 10 years here, how much it has shifted from Black to non-Black, because Black folks are being pushed out because of the gentrification. And that's true, again, for the litany of Black folks, right? Like, you know, poor Black folks, even some middle-class Black folks are being pushed out because they're still being priced out. And so, you know, it's a devastating thing. So I would say, again, if I had to couch it, it's around like, what does a world look like without criminalization? What does a world look like without policing our bodies? What does a world look like where our reproductive autonomy and freedom is recognized and that we're not experiencing reproductive coercion? What does it look like when we don't have to hide in the shadows? What does it look like when we can stop saying that people are DL and discreet because they're able to live their life, you know, the way they see fit for their survival? And I think ultimately, like just us being able to connect every day. I'll end this part with saying, you know, something that deeply disturbs me is when people, and again, I do think it's layered, but when I see so many people attack DL, quote unquote, because I don't believe that's really a thing, but quote unquote DL men, and they do it in such toxic ways, and it's always blaming them. Like, why can't they be out? They have a family. And it's like, your why is on the wrong emphasis. Like, you're right. Why can't they be out? Not why can't they be out? Why? Like, what is the reason that they actually can't be out according to you? Like, is it just because they have a family and they want their cake and eat it too? No, it's likely because they may want to be, but they know how much they would lose because we live in a homo-antagonistic society. Not just randomly in the closet. Like, that's not really a random thing that people are. It is because of so many outside factors, influences, and sometimes violence that force people to be that way. And instead of actually like centering on them and who they are not, I think we need to actively question why they are not. Because I think if we do that, we will realize that it's a societal issue and not an individual issue, as most things often are. So yeah, I have so many visions and dreams and hopes for queer and trans people of color, but ultimately, I just want us to be able to be ourselves without so much like oppression that's constantly being put on us. I just want us to be ourselves.
I think all those things are things that I want to see, but out of all of them that like hit me in my chest, I believe the community piece will get us to that about abolition piece. And I want to see these perceived barriers between us as Black folks, as Black queer folks, as Black cutie pock folks removed. I want more of like at Black and Pink, we talk about family, not because we all get along every day. It's because when you look at someone as family, the amount of grace that you're able to bring to the table hit different. The slights that you will seek to understand rather than to react quickly to are different. And it doesn't mean that you let people just do you wrong. It means that amongst family, it's rare for me to see that when there's a rift in family, the ultimate goal isn't to try to repair the rift. And it may take years. Grandma gonna see you at Christmas. Now, you know you need to call your cousin. Okay, Grandma, you know what? there's always an energy that's pushing us back to each other, even if it takes whatever time it needs to take. And so that family idea, I think our ancestors really showed that to us in ways. I think part of it was that they couldn't be far from each other and call each other on, on FaceTime or engage that way, or start a whole revolution via Twitter, really pull everybody together between a hashtag. No, people had to come together and be people. And that's one of the beauty, like that's something beautiful. I look back at our people and see is like, they knew how to bring folks together that didn't agree on everything, but agreed that there was a goal around our liberation. And there's always room to critique in that, right? Because, shenanigans gonna be shenanigans. But that community piece is something that I dream of. In 10 years, to be able to have a world where we all are connected in a way that feels authentic is something that I'm hungry for. I think COVID exacerbated that in me. To think that I just saw you in March, and how much we took that for granted, of just being in the same room and having conversations and sharing a terrible salad over the lunch hour. How we took that for granted, where now it's like, my goodness, bring me a bowl full of couscous, honey, as long as I can just be amongst my people. Right.
Yes.
Just give it back.
COVID made me realize, as you said, how much we take and took community for granted. It's one of those things we never, in a million years, we never thought, by and large, travel will be stopped or at least stalled a little bit, or we'll be wearing masks all the time. We never in a million lifetimes did we envision that. And now I'm just like, if I could just touch the hem of another person. Right? It's
him.
Oh my gosh, that's so real. And I think that because queer and trans people of color, we live off connection. That is how we survive for so long. We know life and legacy because of connection. And I think that is the thing that's really causing so much rift, is we can't even see each other, or at least we can't see each other in the way that we ordinarily would, right? The fact that we didn't really have Pride this year, oh my gosh, I pray somebody figure this out for next year, because I can't miss another.
Listen, I got a piece of a garment right here that was supposed to be for somebody's Pride Festival. My God.
Yes.
And so but community is the vision. 10 years, I want us to be able to, and real community, that family piece that I feel like that's where the transformation can happen. And if we have the type of community where we're able to lean on each other, we're able to call each other in, we're able to adjust it. Jason Leiden, Black and Pink's founder, said something at the Lighthouse ribbon cutting. Abolition is the vision, and there's people talk often about dismantle and tear it down, but you can also make something go away by starving it. No longer making something necessary is a way to abolish it as well, because the systems may find a way to live, but if we don't allow it to live in our space, then it gets to the point where it's non-existent. And I think the type of community that I want to see happen, that's at least a step. I think we can see abolition in a decade by choosing to become insular to ourselves and push that out and starve them from having access to us, because they don't live if they can't have us in their system, because they sure in the hell ain't gonna do it to their own people. And that's when they would abolish themselves, honey. That's when they would pass a bill. Honey. We done arrested all these white people, girl. Do we need jails anymore? It's a lot of white people in prison, girl.
I know there's there's alternatives to policing now. Listen,
girl, we need $500 billion to do some data assessments on the.
Listen. To be clear, we figured it out with opioid use. So
literally,
when certain segments of society certainly start doing drugs at higher rates, or start experiencing or committing crimes at higher rates, then the government and society figures it out. I tell people this all the time related to COVID. Right? The fact that people got $1,200 within a couple of months of us, really into the pandemic means something. And it wasn't a lot of money, to be clear. To be very clear, it ain't a lot of money. But what it did mean was that we had the ability to do this all along. loans were deferred for like through 2020 now. Like, which means we had the ability to do this all along. People were suspending rent payments, which means we had the ability to do this all along. Like, you know, and we shouldn't have to wait.
Funders said we didn't have to do any fund reports.
Yeah,
girl,
right.
You ain't got to reapply for the grant. We gonna send it, and we gonna send
exactly.
you extra. Y'all got extra.
People are saying, we know you can't meet your targets this year, so let's figure it out. And it's like, oh, we can figure this out now. Oh, well, that's interesting because it means all along we could have done this. And so it's, I need people to make people, like, you have to stop getting people to kill themselves, again, to do things that we should already be doing for people, for them to live sustainable lives. And that is the hill I will die on. Like, is this really an important deadline? Did you tell external people this, or is this something between us? If it's between us, why do I got to break my neck to do this? You know, and these are things that, again, it's related to this nonprofit industrial complex, right? But that looks the same as any other system, right? And people don't want to admit that, but it's so real. Yes, someone just put disabled folks can work from home. Yes, like, people are going to have to convince me, like, hell over high water on why everybody got to go to work now. Restaurants are going to have to convince me why I need to, like, be there. No, why can't you just actually do the same thing you've been doing? Like, why can't I get my drink to go? Because you are doing it now. So there are so many things. Again, COVID exposed many things. It exposed racism in our healthcare system. It exposed a government that's already debilitating and has a terrible infrastructure. But it really deeply exposed the fact that the government could do things all along, but just refuse to do it because how dare them help the country's most marginalized communities? How dare them?
Listen, the reason I'm taking notes, and we're kind of talking in jest, but at the end of the day, we're not saying we don't want these things to be accessible or we would be mad. We're saying that this should be the truth for everyone. It shouldn't have to be the most privileged to be impacted by it for you to recognize the harm that exists and want to undo it. So for folks who may just be bopping in and don't know our personalities, or maybe you're not, have the context, we kiki and joke a bit, but we want this to happen. We just want it to happen for everyone, and we want it now, and we don't want to have to wait for that to come to fruition. So we are 5 minutes over. Preston, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, this is the first talk in a series of 3 panels that we're having this month. There will be a conversation with white folks talking to white folks about shenanigans that go on in queer communities from white folks. So get your blessing. There is a POC Indigenous API panel led by one of my good Judies, Amber Barcel, and it's Andrew's best friend. I have to note that. If we don't lay that out, Andrew, will come back and send a nasty email to our team. Love you, Andrew. So sign up for those, because these conversations are separated because there's a huge umbrella we all kind of live under, but there's nuance and there's experience that's diverse amongst our race and the different parts, the different intersections of us that we need to really dig into to get to that large idea of liberation amongst us. So it's not that we are separating or thinking, why do we have to? This is necessary to get to the larger goals. We got to do work amongst each other and talk about some of these things. So I hope y'all sign up and engage. Everything is on Facebook if you're on Zoom as well, and everything will be put on our YouTube channel for you to go and check out at a later time. So please get into that. Thank my team and the Black and Pink national staff for organizing all the things. And last but not least, I want y'all to go on here. Listen, I'm an ED, Black and Pink donations, that's cute. But y'all get into the Preston's Cash App and Venmo. If we can't talk about Black leadership, Black liberation, Black queer history, and not recognize that so many of our people gave their whole selves, and much of it they did through poverty. Divestment, capitalism, I love those conversations, but the girls who usually are ready to divest first are the girls who have it already. So let me touch it and then let me decide within myself that I don't want it no more. Huh? Amen. So hit up Preston's Cash App and Venmo. I Thank you so much, Preston, again.
Thank you. I always love you. Thank you so much, Dominique.
Love you, Boots. Love you, Boots. Y'all have a great, what day is it? Is it Thursday? Y'all have a,
listen, it is.
Y'all have a great rest of y'all Thursday, and we'll of course talk again soon on from Black and Pink National, and our team. I'm Dominique Morgan, the executive director. Have a great day.